Hey, Detoxers! Welcome to a special episode of the Disinfo Detox. Today we are talking about immigration and education with Professor of History from Diablo Valley College, John Corbally, who is the author of a new book, Enriching America, A World History of 20th Century Immigrant Families. Welcome to the Disinfo Detox.
Hi, Nolan. Thanks so much for having me on. Pleasure to be here, of course.
Heck yeah, man. It's a great book, Enriching America, A World History of 20th Century Immigrant Families. I found it to be really relevant, and I think it's really unique what you did here. So, can you kind of tell folks about the book and how students fit into it?
Yeah, it's. I think it's unusual. It came about because of COVID, like so much else in the world today. Quite simply, there are 7 chapters from the 1920s to the 1970s. So it's a 20th century world history. I specialize in world history. I've written a few books in that field. It's what my degrees are in. It's my religion. I like to tell people it's how I see everything. So during COVID, as we all know, in March that year, students were kind of hard to contact. So I decided to come up with a very simple assignment, which would be more fun than the usual historical reading assignments we give students. I asked students to contact their oldest living family member and give them a call if they could, and ask some basic questions about where did they come from, what was their childhood like, what were their politics or religion, what did they know about their people or their nation, stuff like that. I knew I'd get some good answers, of course, and in that first semester I got, 120 stories. And then over the next 2 years, I kept doing this assignments and ensuing classes, and I collected about 300 total. Then I asked Diablo Valley College to give me a sabbatical so I could turn it all into, what I hope would be a cogent book, a historical story of the 20th century. But it's very much American history, right? Because every family moved to this country. All of the DVC students' families had moved here. Some hadn't, of course. There was white migration in the 1920s. There was also African American migration. But other than that, nearly every story were people that moved to this country. But one way or another, it was migration, domestic or international.
Yeah, the inclusion of the student voice, I think, really adds some depth. For folks out there, you and I both know this teaching history. When we tell people we teach history, they some of them roll their eyes thinking, oh God, that's boring. But I think, first of all, I don't think history is boring, but if you do, I think the stories of immigration add a lot of life to the history and make it something that audiences can connect with. So what drove you to put this project together? Why'd you think it was the right project for this time?
Yeah, I mean, two things there. One is I spend my whole life socially, professionally, with my kids familiarly, trying to convince people that history is not boring. And in my classes, in most of our classes, students walk away saying, you were right, it wasn't so boring. It can be boring. I joke so much about giving boring readings. We've read tens of thousands of books, right? I can see why it's boring. Because of the nature of how you have to structure that macro level information, it's always World War One was terrible, England, Germany, America. You read one diary of World War One, not just a soldier, but a czar, and I defy any living human to say anything but this is fascinating, I need more, right? So it's the oral histories, it's the family stories, the social histories that I think can grab any student or any heathen of our age that doesn't want to read history. So that's kind of one thing I was conscious of in the first place, is how to make history more accessible and interesting, frankly. Um, the student stories, the 70 that I picked in the end, or 65, I think, they're from all over the world. And this is why I liked it, they don't fit into any preconceived notions in our culture wars, in our political divides, or in our class divides even, social class divides, about migrants and America. And that's what you want to write. It's what you're doing for a living here. You want to make people think about what's really happened rather than preordained ideological narratives being pro-migrant or anti-migrant, right? Pro-America, anti-America. These stories, whether I liked it or not, and this is what happened with my PhD dissertation 20 years ago, I went looking for a migrant story in the British Empire that I couldn't find in the sources. I had to be truthful to the sources, as all historians are. With this, out of these 65 or so stories, pretty much 60 of them in the voices of the students and their family members, whether that's parents, grandparents, or otherwise, pretty much 85, 90% of the stories were saying, I love this country. They weren't, certainly not Donald Trump, MAGA, and white nationalists or nationalists. Very few of them were white for a start off. But they loved this country. And as a historian, and as somebody who teaches, most of us being left of center, it's hard to write that, isn't it? It's hard to write that these people loved this country. And either they're all duped or foiled, or this was their honest stories, and that's what most of the stories said. And then secondarily, the student stories, which I could have predicted a bit more, pretty much everyone said, I had no idea what my family have gone through to get me here to Diablo Valley College. And I like that. Anybody with kids, in particular, it's just, yeah, you've got your historical context now. You've got an A for the assignment. Well done. And the stories are fantastic.
Absolutely. And so it's talk to folks who, bring us into that classroom when you, propose this project to students. What's kind of their initial reaction, and how do they react once it's done?
I've done it with over 300 students, and for the most part, they love it. They love doing it. Um, they they learn more in a way with their family history than they can from political or military or diplomatic or economic history, right? And again, it's this question of how to make it accessible. The students being embedded in the story does something which happened to me when I got to this country at 18. I started to think about my history, or my people's history. In my case, my family's Irish. So all of these students went through this epiphany, right? I didn't really think about my place in history. And then my families, and then my ethnic group, or my national group, or my religious group. So that was the plan. That was the manipulative plan behind the assignment from the beginning, is make them realize they are part of it. And the students, to a last person, said they loved doing it. And I recommend any other professor or teacher tries this, because it's a win. You can't lose. The only thing that happened is one or two students didn't do the assignment, and then there's that. And then, quite humorously, once I had the 70 best stories, because not all the stories are fascinating, right? I'm the son of George Bush, and I'm a politician, right? Stories like that weren't going to go in the book, but some of them were brilliant stories. I had to get permissions from all these families. I had to call them on the phone, and it was quite hard getting through to past some parents, like, who are you, why are you calling? And of course, two or three families with great stories from Argentina and from Russia wouldn't give, and Vietnam, one more, wouldn't give me permission, because I think of, these were stories from the 50s and 60s. There was fear of not retribution, but something if those stories were published. I asked to do it anonymously, but they said, no, the story's true, but we're too scared to have it published. So these are people, who came from Argentina with the right-wing death squads, or who came from Soviet Russia or Vietnam in the 70s, who have amazing stories but wouldn't let me publish them, which was heartbreaking.
Yeah, obviously your book comes out in a moment where, well, it seems like it's been decades now of fixation on immigration debates here in this country, but certainly have really ramped up
Yeah.
here during Trump's second term. So for folks, regardless of where they stand on the ideological spectrum, but folks who are kind of wrestling with these questions about, immigration and its importance to the United States in this moment, what do you think your book has to offer for folks who are wrestling with questions about that?
Yeah, I've got an answer for that. And if I might spend 1 minute on my own story, which might give context for it, people
Absolutely.
don't know your story, right? I grew up in England and Australia. Family are Irish, so we were immigrants in England. Very working class. I don't say poor anymore, because there's poor and there's poor, but we had nothing. I moved to Australia undocumented as a kid with my parents. I moved here undocumented at 18 and lived here for 8 years without papers. So I'm not saying I was in some LA gang here. I recognize the difference in migrant groups, but being undocumented or illegal for 8 years, you have to do certain things to keep going and make a living. So, there's a story there about being a migrant and my fear. I was playing soccer, doing construction. I wouldn't go to the hospitals in the late 80s and 90s, because I just figured if I walk into those hospitals, there's an authority there, right? And then you get deported. So I put a nail through my head once and wouldn't go to the hospital because I was scared. So I understand the migrant experience and that fear that's always there. So again, not to compare that to some of the traumas of migrant stories today, but it was in my life from the beginning, and I got my papers eventually. But so I'm a migrant. My PhD was on migration in the British Empire, and then once I started studying world history at Stanford 15 years ago, I realized it was all migration. That word encompasses all human motion, all human stories. And of course, borders and customs and tariffs are a very recent construct in the last century. So for most of history, we've flowed around like animals, like mammals all over the planet. That's what we've done, right? We've migrated, not just out of Africa, but throughout the 19th century, 18th century, we keep moving. A lot more forced migration than we'd like, but it's migration. So that was my interest. It's always been there. I can't help but teach history and read history through the motion of not nations or religions or states or races. I read it through this fluid lineages of humans migrating. So my own background and my interests. Um, As far as the book itself, I think it's exactly what we need. There's four main concepts that I've got in the beginning. One is that the story of ideas and their consequences. There's nothing magical about that, but people don't tend to think that all these things we believe, religious or secular, are ideas that were constructed by somebody before. They're just ideas, right? And they have consequences. That's one. The second is gravitational forces. We have this kind of post-1960s perspective that all nations or peoples are equal. We wish it was so, but they're not. You've got hegemons. You've got America, China, Russia, and their gravitational force is impacting people all over the world, right? And obviously countries in the Middle East fit into that too. So I wanted to point out that we can be idealistic about equality of power, but there is real power differences in this world. It's always been that way. And those gravitational forces explain why migrants have to move so often, right? They have to move to where the wealth and the jobs are. That's two. The third factor was, and I think this is very important, is the notion of factions. We always think in terms of America, Christianity, Islam, white people, Arabs, Jews. Well, that's not sufficiently detailed. There are factions within all those groups in every moment in history. You can see it today by looking at the right or the left and the factionalism we have here, right? So I wanted to point out that the interpretive device shouldn't be nations, religions, or races, but factions within every group. That means you've got thousands of actors. Look at World War One. There are factions within Kaiser Wilhelm's office. It's not Germany against Russia and Serbia. The Black Hand terrorists in Serbia had factions within the group, and the Serbian government had factions all working against each other, right? So not to overdo the point, but you can't understand history unless you understand the factions within those names we're so familiar with: America, Christianity, etc. And the fourth section was, to sum it up, as this point of migration. People move because of those three notions above: ideas, factions, and gravitational forces. They move because there's a wind blowing them most of the time, not because they've got an H-1 visa to work for Google, right, and live in San Francisco. No disrespect to those people. They're doing good work. But ultimately, people move, and this was my own case, regardless of the fact that I'm a white male with an English accent, they move because of winds blowing them. You had no choice. You're literally on a raft in the ocean. So I wanted to point out that migration, to get to your question about today, isn't something, people aren't moving here, as you well know, because they want to come to our country and cause trouble, right? People want to stay where they're from. I mean, I've been away from my homeland now most of my life, but I'm still English and miss it. You move because you have to, right? So that's, of course, something that conservatives, whether they're heartless or considerate, aren't paying attention to. That people don't want to be here. It's because of the history and the gravitational forces and ideas. On the other hand, I will tell you, in my 30s and 40s, I was very much an advocate for open borders. I mean, I was paying into that organization the little that I had, and I wanted to open up the world to open borders, right? And it's an ideal, it's beautiful. But the last 10 years, I've changed my views on that. I was in Europe last year teaching. I spoke to hundreds of Europeans about, migration into Italy and France and even England and Scandinavia. Open borders is, I don't want to be condescending and say a fantasy, but it's an idea that might be a bit too idealistic for the world we live in. So we have to do something, and we have to secure borders. I hate using that language, you know how it sounds, but you have to have secure borders. So I guess that's the point is, the migrant story was there in the first place. It precedes the Republicans and the Democrats and Donald Trump. It's a bigger picture, and we have to find a balance between letting anybody move anywhere, but recognizing that, as in the 70 stories in my book, people move because they have to, not because they want to cause trouble. And to make it very clear, most migrants move in very difficult circumstances. Even if you're middle class today, you're moving here, you've lost your roots. You can be a white European and be in culture shock when you get to this country, as I was, right? So all the other groups, the culture shock is massive, and it's very hard, and we have to be sympathetic to that, which is ultimately why I'm pro-migrant, because they're doing God's work and they're enriching America.
I have a follow-up question for you, and I ask this because, both my grandparents, still alive, are from Ireland, so I'm a fellow potato eater. But I wonder, do you see any kind of comparison to, whatever it is, rhetorically, or any of the treatment you see right now against folks from Central and South America in the United States to what you experience as being Irish in the British Empire? Is there any comparison there? You see any overlap?
No, I mean, not at all. My story moving here from 18 onwards was one of, massive economic insecurity and confusion and being alone without my family. But that's again nothing. I mean, let's face facts. I'm white with an accent, so it didn't hurt me any of that. No, I mean, what people go through when they cross that border, we all know this. Even if they're in a gang, even if they're a criminal connected to the narcos, let alone the vast majority of families in all the images we see, they're moving in desperation and they're looking for food. And this is where conservatives have to face facts that if you go to the borders and see human beings, you'll soon drop your ideology and recognize I have to help these people, right? It's much
Mhm.
simpler to just say send them back from wherever you are in Michigan than it would be, especially if you've got a heart and you've got faith. It's much harder than if you go and see families and see their environments. So for me, it's a matter of humanizing and showing what people go through. And also, we all know that the reason, as per the book, the reason so many families move now as then is because they don't have any choice. They would rather not be making this trip, right? And so the solution to that is geopolitical and global, right? And I'm not quite sure how we fix that. That's a question beyond my pay scale.
Yeah, and on this show, one of the things we do on the Disinfo Detox, we try to disentangle false media narratives or maybe baseless media narratives from what is true or provable.
Yeah.
So, for folks out there who are engaged in this immigration debate, what are some things that stand out to you that you think need to be corrected or maybe perhaps readdressed that we're seeing right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I think we should have data. If ICE are going to be going into cities and acting the way they are, they could provide PR and to their benefit, provide some data to those of us that are concerned and to the families running scared. They could say, we have information that is clear on this person, and they might be a danger. And I doubt many Americans, whether radical left or otherwise, would argue with that, right? When it's just unscrupulous and indiscriminate, and they're picking up large groups of people, they must expect a reaction, not just from the left, but those who believe in civil liberties of all Americans. So I think we have to kind of get information from ICE, but we also have to get information, I think, from the cities. It's not like the bureaucracy of any city like Los Angeles, San Francisco are renowned for clear and good data, right? But if we're going to make the case for keeping our cities secure and protecting immigrants, then we have to show data that these immigrants moved here for these reasons, and we're protecting them for legal reasons, rather than just randomly protecting 100%. In the cities, it's not simple, and I'm no expert, that's for sure.
Well, good. Where can folks follow your work and get a copy of the book?
Right now, the best place to go is Amazon, where I've got a 20th century world history book, which is the historical basis of this migrant book. That's on there. 20th century world history. There's also an early modern world history from 1500 to 1750 with Casey Sullivan from UC Davis. And this book is not on Amazon yet, but you can go to Cognella, the publisher in San Diego, Cognella, Cognella, and buy it directly from them for now.
Great. All right. He is John Corbally, professor of history at Diablo Valley College. The book is Enriching America, History of 20th Century Migrant Families. John, thank you so much for coming on the Disinfo Detox.
Thank you, Nolan. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you, Detoxers. We'll see you next time.